thing. Lord, I pray that you'd speak through JP today. I pray that you'd bless him, bless the things that he tells us. Lord, I pray that you'd reveal your word to us. Thank you so much, Lord, for being in our lives. It's an amazing thought to think that we'd be in your physical presence one day. It's also terrifying, Lord, that we'd be in your physical presence one day. Lord, it's just amazing to be changed, to be made more righteous each day, to be made more like you. It's such an amazing thing, Lord, to see the changes through the struggles that we're going through now, Lord. It's amazing to see you helping us and guiding us and teaching us. I look forward to the day, Lord, when we're as righteous as you are, and we're walking like you walk. Praise your holy name, Lord. Amen.
Okay, so Torah portion today, Vayechi. I'm going to go through at some point vowel points in Hebrew, because there's only about 6 of them, and once you know them, they're dead easy to recognize. But basically, it's the vav, and it's important for us to recognize what the vav means, because we've been talking about how verbs are conjugated on Pialim, and using a program or a website like Pialim to look at verb conjugation, you need to understand what parts of the words are the conjugated verb and which parts of the word are just extra, and that if you put them into Pialim, they won't work. So if you've got a vav before a word, it just means and. The actual important part of it is this yechi. Okay, when you've got the verb is chaye or chaya, okay, which means live. You've got the life of Sarah, which is chaye Sarah. Chaya is the verb. Yechi is the conjugated form of it. The yod basically means he, or third person did this verb, so he lived. So vachi means and he lived. Okay, so when you're putting things into Pialim, ignore letters like this, and I'll go through the other letters at another point. I'll go through the vowel pointings, because it's just this tiny bit of knowledge about Hebrew can give you access to so much stuff. I know so little about Hebrew from what there is to know about Hebrew, but I know some useful things, so I'll share them at some point. In this Torah portion, I want to look in the first part at something that is just, I don't know, it's just completely missed a lot of the times, but a lot of the time it's acknowledged, but it's not acknowledged just how important it is to our walk. Often, you know, we completely reject the idea when people say, oh, you know, I'm just on a journey and I'll get there eventually with this, that, or the other. This thing is more important than things like keeping the Shabbat and wearing tzitzit and eating clean. And yet it's something that people are so prepared to just put off into the future and say, oh, I'll get there eventually, I'm on a journey. And it's all the exact same excuses with it. And the second part, I'm going to read the bulk of the Torah portion, because it's such a short Torah portion. And I'm going to compare it in the Masoretic text to how it appears in the Septuagint, because they're vastly different. Also going to look at the idea of us having a number of days appointed to our lives. And that's kind of going to connect to what I'm going to talk about in the third part, which is the resurrection, Sheol and the resurrection, basically. So I'll get on with the first part, because the first part is going to be long. Whenever you look at a concept like this and you look at how it appears in all of the scriptures, the Old Testament, the New Testament, it's just a long process. So that part's going to be long. The other parts aren't going to be all that long at all. So Genesis 47:28 says, and Yaakov lived in the land of Mitzrayim 17 years. So the length of Yaakov's life was 147 years. And the time for Yisrael to die drew near. And that's what I'm going to look at in the second part. And he called his son Yosef and said to him, now if I have found favor, or it's chen, it's grace, if I found grace in your eyes, please put your hand under my thigh and show chesed and emet to me. Now, this word chesed, it means steadfast love in certain contexts, but the overarching idea of it is kindness. That's really what it means. In specific contexts, the implication is steadfast love, in a lot of them, in fact. But the overarching concept that's there is kindness. Kindness and truth are things that are mentioned together in the scriptures, just all the way through. So I'm going to examine these concepts, kindness and truth, because we focus so much on this idea of truth, and it's almost like the truth is on a pedestal as the highest ideal of Yehovah. That's not actually true, and we're going to see this is the highest ideal. This is what is really important to Yehovah, and this is an integral part of his character. So chesed and emet. Genesis 24:26-27 says, and the man bowed down his head and worshipped Yehovah. So this is Eliezer, Abraham's servant, when he goes to get a bride for Isaac. And he said, blessed be Yehovah, Elohim of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his chesed and his emet towards my master. So this is something that's recognized about Yehovah all the way through Scripture. Yes, of course, he's excelling in truth. And that's extremely important. Truth is extremely important. But an actual part of the truth of who Yehovah is his chesed. And so many people focus on one of these, and they miss an integral component of it. Proverbs 14:22 says, do not those who plan evil go astray, but chesed and emet are to those who plan good. Okay, so Yehovah's name, his character, is comprised of, showing grace, showing compassion, being patient, being kind, and also of truth. But these things are often mentioned isolated, but more often than not, when truth is mentioned, chesed is right there, because kindness and truth are inseparable. Psalm 25 verse 10 says, all the paths of Yehovah are kindness and truth to those who guard his covenant and his witnesses. 2 Samuel 22:24-26 says, and I am perfect before him, and I guard myself from my crookedness, from my iniquity. Yehovah repays me according to my righteousness, according to my cleanness before his eyes. But it's not the only thing that he repays you according to. It says, with the kind, you show yourself kind. And the word for kind here is chassid. It means kind ones. It's a noun. It's the noun form of this verb, chasad. And chasad is the verb root of chesed. Okay, they both mean essentially being kind. So with the kind, you show yourself kind. With the perfect one, you show yourself perfect. Matthew 5 verse 7 says, blessed are the, and in the Greek it's elamon, okay, but in the Septuagint version, where you've got the word chesed, the word in Greek is eleos, and this is the adjective form of that verb. So it's describing people who are kind. You can miss these things when you go into the New Testament, because the translations, just based on the translator that's translated the Greek, it's gone from Hebrew to Greek to English. The concept has. But this is the concept chesed, okay, or those who are chesed. Blessed are the kind, because they shall obtain kindness, is what it says. Psalm 48:11 says, I've delighted to do your will, O my Elohim, and your Torah is within my heart. I've proclaimed the good news of righteousness in the great assembly. See, I do not restrain my lips, O Yehovah, you know. I did not conceal your righteousness within my heart. I have declared your trustworthiness and your deliverance. I did not hide your chesed and emet from the great assembly. Do not withhold your compassion from me, O Yehovah. Let your chesed and emet always watch over me. In the Hebrew, this is a different word. The concept, you can see it all the way through. He's talking about his righteousness. He's talking about the gospel. He's talking about the good news. But it's his chesed along with his emet. Psalm 57:9-10 says, I praise you among the peoples, O Yehovah. I sing to you among the nations. For your chesed is great up to the heavens, and your truth unto the clouds. So again, when these things are mentioned, they're mentioned in unison. And yet it's so prevalent today for people to have one without the other. Okay, people with perhaps kind of a lazy analogy or comparison to this would be Christians have love without truth, and Torah keepers have truth without love, or truth without kindness. And it's kind of a bit like that. But Torah keepers, you will find this. I was talking to Charlie in the kitchen about Israel. The way that Israel went astray is they didn't follow the Torah by faith. Okay, they just followed it, as it were, by the works of the law. And that's a trap that we need to not fall into. We need to follow it by faith. We need to recognize who he is and walk in these things. But this is more important than this. And this is what we'll see as we go through. Psalm 85, 7-13 says, show us your chesed, O Yehovah. Give us your deliverance. Let me hear what ails Yehovah speaks, for he speaks shalom to his people and to his kind ones. Often translated holy ones in the King James. It's not holy ones though. You get a better translation, it will say kind ones. It says chassid, those who show chesed. And let them not turn again to folly. Truly his deliverance, as Yeshua, is near to those who fear him, for esteem to dwell in our land. Chesed and emet shall meet, righteousness and shalom. Okay, so you've got chesed and emet meeting, and then the same thing, the same thought is expressed in righteousness and peace shall kiss. Emet, truth, sprouts forth from the earth, and righteousness looks down from the heaven. Indeed, Yehovah gives what is good, and our land yields its increase. Righteousness goes before him and prepares a way for his footsteps. Exodus 34, 5-7. What we see here is Yehovah coming down and telling us what his name is, telling us what his character is. He actually declares it himself. Yehovah came down in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name Yehovah. And Yehovah passed before him and proclaimed, Yehovah, Yehovah, Aneo, compassionate, showing grace or favor, patient, great in kindness and truth. Okay, you notice how kindness and truth are one unit there. Okay, he's compassionate, he's patient, he shows grace, and he's great in kindness and truth. Watching over chesed, over kindness for thousands, forgiving crookedness and transgression and sin. So this is how Yehovah describes himself. These are the 5 elements of his personality that he highlights. 2 Samuel 2, 5-6 says, David then sent messengers to the men of Yavesh Gilad and said to them, you are blessed of Yehovah, for you have shown this chesed to your master, to Shaul, that you buried him. And now Yehovah, show chesed and emet to you, and I am also going to do you good because you have done this deed. I include this, not necessarily because this is what this particular verse is supposed to say, but just to make the point that when we look for favor in the eyes of Elohim and favor in the eyes of man, which is what is discussed here, what an integral component of that is kindness. It's not just, oh, we're following the Torah, we're wearing tzitzit, we don't break the Shabbat, we pass these tests of faith in that regard. Okay? There's this integral part of it. Ephesians 4, 25-32 says, therefore, having put off the false, speak truth. Okay, so this idea of chesed is involved in what you speak and what you do and how you are with other people. So now we have put off the false. Now we're walking, doing the actions, the works of Torah, which are in accordance with his idea of righteousness. We're walking in these things, but there's more. It's a much deeper walk that we've got. Each one with this neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be wroth, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your rage. And we're gonna look at that. But this is an element of this, anger. Anger is a massive part of this. Nor give place to the devil. Now, what's interesting is we identify in our lives when we have tests from Hasatan. When Yehovah is using Hasatan to test us, will you do this? You know, will you break the Shabbat. Are you going to do that? This is the easier way to do it. This looks really, really hard. What are you going to do here? But what we often don't recognize is the tests from Hasatan about whether we're going to be patient with people, about whether we're going to be angry with people, about whether we're going to be loving and whether we're going to be kind. Because we get these things that come up and we excuse ourselves. We wouldn't excuse any other type of sin in our lives, but because this kind of just goes under the radar, we excuse this, and we use all the same excuses that people always use. You know, oh, I'm just not there yet. I'm on a journey. I'm going to get there eventually. These things, as we'll see, Yeshua describes these things as the weightier matters of the Torah, the more important parts of the Torah. So we need to identify these things and say, no, when these things come up, we have a choice. We have a choice about how we're going to deal with people. We have a choice whether we're going to be patient, whether we're going to be angry, whether we're going to be compassionate or kind towards them. We've got a choice, and often it's not what we want to do. Often pride or whatever it is within our personality flares up. And we wouldn't do it with any other kind of sin, but we do it with this. Let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, so that he has somewhat to share with those in need. Let no corrupt word come out of your mouth, but only such as is good for the use of building up, so as to impart what is pleasant to the hearers. That's quite a statement. Okay? Let no corrupt word come out of your mouth, only such as is good for the use of building up of other people, to impart what's pleasant to the hearers. Slander, gossip, coarse joking, all of that sort of thing. And do not grieve the set-apart spirit of Elohim. When we think of that, and when we've looked at this before, we talk about it in terms of sin, like what we would recognize more as sin. But those things are equally as true and equally as pressing upon us for things like kindness. Let all bitterness and anger and bad temper and shouting and slander be put away from you, along with all ill will. And what we're going to see is that the reason that we're commanded, or a reason that we're commanded to do this sort of thing, is because people are looking at us. Okay? We're looking at each other. We need to have the authority to speak to people about the truth. Whoever it is in our lives that we want to talk to about the truth, we need to have the authority in their eyes. And before you can start talking to somebody about, deeper matters of truth, they're going to look at you and they're going to see whether or not what is true in you is what everyone can universally agree on as is true. They're going to look at you and they're going to ask, is this person a kind person? Because if you're not a kind person, they're not going to want to listen to anything that you've got to say any further than that, because they can't even recognize in you what they agree to be true before you go any deeper with them. Be kind towards one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as Elohim also forgave you in Messiah. And as I say, because these things are often so personal in our lives, these are things that we don't want to let go. And these are things, sin, that we excuse in ourselves and say, I'm just on a journey, I'll get there eventually, I'm getting better, I'm doing this. And it's all the same lie that we have identified as a terrible lie that we should never accept as an excuse. The same thing we listen to in ourselves. Matthew 23:23 says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you tithe the mint and the anise and the cumin." And these were things that were incredibly valuable back when this is talking about. Okay, these are incredibly valuable things. Spices were incredibly valuable. And have neglected the weightier matters of the Torah, the judgment and the compassion. There's that word again, eleos, it's kindness. The judgment is his mishpatim, the elements of his law which tell us how we should deal with one another, what's right, what's just, how we justly interact with one another. That's his mishpatim, his judgments. So you neglect the mishpatim out of the law, but you're doing all the other things. You're doing, keeping the Shabbat, and you're really, really strict on keeping the Shabbat, and really strict on keeping wearing tzitzit, and really strict on eating clean food, really strict on tithing. You tithe like really meticulously, but you've neglected the weightier matters, how to deal with one another, kindness towards one another, and the belief the faith. Because to do these things here requires belief, great belief. And when we're tested in those things, they're tests of faith as well. Are we going to do those things? Do we really believe the word? Are we going to act when anger comes up inside of us? Are we going to act on that anger or not? That's a test of faith. It's a test from Hasatan. It's exactly the same. There's no difference. He says these need to have been done without neglecting the others. These need to have been done. Need for these without neglecting the Torah, without neglecting what we've already identified as so important when we're tested in it. 1 Corinthians 13, 1-6 says, if I speak with the tongues of men and of messengers, of angels, but do not have love, I have become as a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. This is the danger in it. Okay, again, if you are not a kind person, if people don't identify and go, this person's walking in truth, I can identify just the things that I know to be true about them. They're walking in truth. I want to know more about this person. I want to, you can be a light to the world then. But if not, the things that you then say, you sound like a clanging cymbal or as a sounded brass, just something that's making a horrible noise because they don't recognize love in you as the primary thing which undergirds it all. And if I have prophecy and know all secrets and all knowledge, and if I have all belief so as to move mountains, but do not have love, I am none at all. None at all. What Yeshua was saying is that the mishpatim, the kindness and the belief, they are more important to have than the rest. Okay, they're the weightier matters. So you could say kindness without, the minutiae of the Torah is better than the minutiae of the Torah without kindness. That gets you nowhere. That's exactly what Paul is saying here. If you've got all of those things, but you haven't got love, it's nothing at all. Okay, if you had love, if you had kindness, but you didn't have all of those other things, you would be in a better position. Now, that's not desirable. It's not like, well, that's what we want. We want love, but without the minutiae of the Torah and walking in righteousness. It's not what I'm saying at all, but it's more valuable. And if I give out all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I give my body to be burned, but do not have love, I'm not profited at all. That's quite a thing to have done, to give out all your possessions to feed the poor, to make this sacrifice, to give your body itself to be burned. This is obviously hyperbole. But if you don't have love in that, it just works. You're not profited at all. Love is patient, is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not boast, is not puffed up, does not behave indecently, does not seek its own, is not provoked, reckons not the evil, does not rejoice over the unrighteousness, but rejoices in truth. Okay, so if you've got all of this without this, it's nothing at all. If you've got this, but not that, it's better. It's not desirable, but it's better. But look through those things. Patient, kind, it doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not puffed up, it does not behave indecently. Now, it's been very much a change in my thinking as I've been doing this Torah portion, just seeing how important this is. Incredibly, incredibly important. I don't like to think of myself as somebody who's not patient, but I know that there are times that come up where I will lose my patience, where I will be angry, and it is a choice. It is a choice to make, and it's seeing it as this serious, as serious as we would take keeping the Shabbat or being tested in any other regard. It changes your mind on these things. Proverbs 30:33 says, "For as milk with force brings forth curds, and as a nose with force brings forth blood, so anger with force brings forth strife." And this idea of with force isn't really a concept we can translate into English, but it means basically with impetus, adding something to it. Okay, milk on its own isn't going to bring forth curds or cheese. Okay, you've got to add an impetus to it. Anger on its own isn't going to bring forth strife. You can experience anger in yourself, but you've got a choice then. Are you going to take the anger, make it something else? Okay, you're going to give impetus to the anger that's within you. Psalm 4:4 says, tremble and do not sin. Speak within your heart on your bed and be still, Selah. That's what it says in the Masoretic text. Now we know Paul said, be ye angry and sin not. It's been changed as far as I can see in the Masoretic text. Can't speak to their motives for doing it, but it definitely seems funny to me that all of the places where there's a change, they're changing quotes from the New Testament. This is what it says in the Septuagint. Be ye angry and sin not. Feel compunction upon your beds for what you say in your hearts. Pause. Selah means pause. Okay, so we're to feel anger, but not give impetus to it, which brings forth strife. And when we feel anger, we take ownership over it. We control it. We keep it within the realms of us. And then we feel compunction for it. We feel compunction for what we've said in our hearts. And that's the process that Scripture dictates. 1 Corinthians 10:3-5 says, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not fight according to the flesh. For the weapons we fight with are not fleshly, but mighty in Elohim for overthrowing strongholds, overthrowing reasonings in every high matter, like anger, like impatience, bad temper, that exalts itself against the knowledge of Elohim, taking captive every thought to make it obedient to the Messiah. So be angry, but don't sin with it. When you feel that anger, control it within yourself. Take it captive to be obedient to the Messiah. Proverbs 29:22 says, an angry man stirs up arguments, and a hot-tempered man causes many transgressions. This is all the way through, not only the New Testament, but also all the way through the Old Testament. Proverbs 20:3, avoiding strife brings a man honor, but every fool is quarrelsome. So when you've got a situation in your life, and you've got some kind of provocation in your life, and you want to respond angrily to it, remember what it is. Remember that Hasatan comes and tempts you because all he wants is for you to step outside of the boundaries of keeping the word. And yes, that's true of sin, but it's true of this. More so, these things are the weightier matters of the Torah. Proverbs 15:1 says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stirs up anger. Okay, so in the moment, you've got a choice as to how you're going to respond to something. A provocation comes up. What are you going to do? A soft word turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. It's how you respond to people. You decide the course of conversations. You decide what you're going to do. Proverbs 16:32 says, he who is patient is better than the mighty, and he who rules over his spirit than he who takes a city. And this is what it's about. Okay, it's about taking control of your spirit. There's a lot of verses that use this sort of language that we're going to look at. I've spoken before about when I stopped taking heroin. The thing that I said to myself was, nothing can make me, talking about me, the inner man, my spirit, nothing can make me do what I don't want to do. My body cannot make me do what I don't want to do. I've got control over my spirit. Proverbs 14:29, he who is patient has great understanding, but he who is short of spirit exalts folly. Okay, so just like anything else where you've got your flesh, and your flesh wants you to act in a sinful way, you walk in the spirit. You take charge of that and you walk in the spirit. You rule over your own spirit. And we've got the Ruach, which helps us in this and strengthens the inner man in this so that we can do it. Ecclesiastes 7:8-9 says, better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Again, be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the bosom of fools. We've looked at a lot of verses about the wise and the foolish. Okay, how that works. And we exclude ourselves from the camp of the foolish when it comes to our attitude to the Torah and following the minutiae of it and being tested in those things. But often we can put ourselves in the camp of the fools in how we are in spirit. Now, I put this picture up because I think it's a great great representation of how when something has been cleansed, when something is pure, when something's white, it only takes a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of what is dark to spoil it. Okay, you release that into what's white and pure, and the tiniest bit has an effect. I'm going to show you a verse that I was given maybe 4 or 5 years ago, because there'd been something where I had had a bad attitude towards something, and I was praying about it, praying about what the consequences of it are. I can't really explain my thought process. I'll just show you the verse where it says, "Dead flies make the perfumer's ointment stink. Ferment. A little folly outweighs wisdom, esteem." You can have laid this great foundation of good works, even of kindness and patience in these situations, but all it takes is a tiny little bit of folly, and that outweighs all of the rest of it. Because then you've given all the people who are onlookers, you've given them the ammunition that they want to disregard the things that you're saying, because you're not walking in the truth. You can be proclaiming to be walking in the truth as much as you want, but if they can't see what they universally agree to be true in you, then they're not going to listen to it. And just that little tiny bit outweighs wisdom. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left. And also, when a fool walks along the way, his heart fails, and he shows everyone that he's a fool. This was a horrible, horrible verse to receive as a response to what I was saying, but it made me more cautious. Okay? A fool walks along the way. Again, we want to distance ourselves from the fools, and we can in many respects. But if we walk along the way and we're given a test, you know, are you going to be angry? Are you going to be impatient? Are you going to be bad-tempered in this circumstance? Just takes that little tiny bit and you show everyone that you're a fool. That's not good. Proverbs 17:14 says, "The beginning of strife is like releasing water. Therefore, stop fighting before it breaks out." Okay, it's the same thing of ruling your spirit. When you feel that anger rise up inside you, of taking control of it, like any other desire to sin that perhaps somebody else would experience, somebody with some kind of addiction would say, no, it's uncontrollable when it comes. It's not uncontrollable. Okay, resist the devil and he will flee from you. But the temptation seems so strong in the moment to lose your temper. Stop fighting before it breaks out. That's your choice. That's when you are angry but you don't sin. Yeah, then you feel compunction in your heart for the things that you say in it. A man who has no control over his spirit is like a broken down city without a wall. And see, obviously, the metaphor here. Okay, there's no boundary, there's no protective measure that's there. You've got no control over your spirit, and you're willing to just say, oh yeah, you know, we're all on a journey, I'll change eventually, I know that I should be different and this should be different, but I'm going to get there. And we don't treat it with the same seriousness and the same gravity as we treat any other kind of sin. Then we allow ourselves to be deluded by these things. A fool lets out all his spirit, but the wise calms it down. We have the ability to do this. It doesn't matter how we feel internally. We've got the ability to be kind, be patient with people, to make it about them, or make it about Yehovah at the very least. 2 Peter 1, 5-10. We've read this passage in the context of the other sorts of sin that we've looked at before, but now we can read it in this context. "And for this reason, do your utmost to add to your belief uprightness." And we've looked, uprightness, the word is kind of a bit like virtue. It's add a desire to be virtuous to your faith. Okay, so you've got faith. Now what you want to do is add the desire to be virtuous and act correctly to that. Then when you've got that desire, what you add to it is knowledge, because you need to know what you need to do. And that's what we're doing today. We're adding knowledge. To knowledge, self-control. Okay, if people are at a point where you're like, okay, I've identified this within myself, need to take this as seriously as other sin, I need to stop when these temptations come. This is the point then. Self-control. You need to control yourself, have control over your spirit, calm down anger when it rises up within you. To self-control, endurance then, once you've got that and you've mastered it and you're doing it in the tests when they come along, then you add endurance to that and it becomes who you are. And we've looked at how endurance leads to reverence. Interestingly then, to brotherly affection, and to brotherly affection add love. For if these are in you and increase, they cause you to be neither inactive nor without fruit in the knowledge of our Master Yeshua Messiah. But again, not just in those minutiae of the Torah that we look at, in all of these things we're looking at now. For he in whom these are not present is blind, being short-sighted, and has forgotten that he's been cleansed from his old sins. For this reason, brothers, all the more do your utmost to make firm your calling and choosing. For if you are doing these matters, you shall never stumble at all. Okay, if you're doing these things in regard to anger and impatience and not being kind with people when you should be, if you put this into place, you'll never stumble with those things at all. You will regain control over your spirit. Colossians 3:8-9 says, but now also put off all these: bad temper, anger, malice, slander, foul speech from your mouth. Do not lie to each other, since you have put off the old man with his practices. Okay, these are the practices of the body of sin. Okay, we talk about how once you're baptized, you've put to death the man of sin, and now you've been raised to the newness of life. Okay, and now we keep the Sabbath. No, that's not where it's at. Okay, yes, keeping the Sabbath is great. Passing those tests is great. But it's more than that. Okay, there's the weightier matters of the Torah that we need to get a firm grip on so that we can be effective in the knowledge of Yeshua, so that we can be effective as witnesses to people. Colossians 3:12-14 says, therefore, as chosen ones of Elohim, set apart and beloved, put on compassion, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other. If anyone has a complaint against another, indeed, as Messiah forgave you, so also should you. So think about the situations in your life. Okay, are you compassionate, kind, humble, meek? Do you have patience? Do you bear with the people who are in your lives? Do you forgive the people in your lives? But above all these, put on love, which is a bond of the perfection. Why do you think the New Testament hammers this so much all the way through? I think it's no wonder that people like to read. When they come into Torah, they like to read the Old Testament more than the New Testament, because there's some really challenging things in the New Testament. Philippians 2:14-16 says, do all matters without grumblings and disputings, in order that you be blameless and faultless, children of Elohim, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Listen to what it's saying. You want to be a light. You want to be blemishless within a crooked and perverse generation. Because if you're not in these regards, grumblings and disputings, and you're not kind, and you're impatient, you're bad-tempered, then people in the world see you being like that. They're not going to listen to a word you've got to say. Holding on to the word of life, for a boast to me in the day of Messiah that I have not run in vain or labored in vain. What's the context of what he's saying here? It's this. He's saying, holding on to the word of life in these things, that I have not run in vain or labored in vain. You don't want to stand before Yehovah and think that your actions are keeping the Sabbath or passing certain tests are the things that are going to save you. Okay, it's about your soul being converted. It's about holding on to the entire word of life, not just the bits of the word of life which are more convenient. Titus 2. Okay, now I'm going to speak in this next part. I'm going to talk about marriage, about these things in the context of a marriage. I get a lot of letters or of emails, not of letters, all that often, talking to me about, you know, I'm a Torah keeper, but my husband is a Christian, or, you know, I'm a Torah keeper, but my husband's an atheist, or I'm a Torah keeper, but my husband's a a lukewarm Torah keeper, or my wife, put it in the other side of things. My wife's a lukewarm Torah keeper. What do I do? How do I act? How do I bring them into this knowledge of the truth? And I'm aware when I speak of things to do with marriage, the criticism could very well be leveled against me. What's JP got to say about marriage? What does he know about marriage? He's been married 1.5 years. And I'd agree, absolutely. If this was JP's marriage advice, then that would just be a joke, wouldn't it? But what I'm going to talk, what I'm going to speak, is the word of Elohim, and show you what the word says, so that we can recognize these situations in our lives. This is Paul's advice to Titus. Titus was a pastor of a few different places, but this is what he wrote to him and advised him that he should be teaching on in his assemblies. But you speak what is fitting for sound teaching or sound doctrine. The older men are to be sober, serious, self-controlled, sound in belief, in love, in endurance. The older women likewise are to be set apart in behavior, not slanderers, not given to much wine, teachers of what is good, in order for them to train the young women to love their husbands and love their children. Okay, so what the older women are to do is to teach the younger women how to love their husbands and how to love their children. So what do they need to be doing to teach those things? They need to have got a grip of loving their husband and loving their children. To be self-controlled, blameless, workers at home, good, subject to their own husbands, in order that the word of Elohim is not spoken of. And this is a theme that you see all the way through. In order that the word of Elohim is not evil spoken of, you've got to represent who Elohim is in your character. Likewise, urge the young men to have self-control. Show yourself to them an example of good works in all matters. In teaching, show uncorruptness and seriousness, soundness of speech beyond reproach, in order that the opponent is put to shame, having no evil word to say about you. There's the same theme, okay? But when Paul is instructing Titus on what to teach, okay, be unreprovable, be without reproach, so that no evil word can be spoken against you. Servants should be subject to their own masters, to be well-pleasing in every way. Not back-talking is what it says. It's doing the weird thing. Okay, not back-talking. But in all of these things, these principles that are explained as reasons why people should be doing things or what they should be doing are applicable to all the other situations. Not back-talking. Okay? Husbands, don't backtalk to your wives. Wives, don't backtalk to your husbands. Be subject to people. Love your wives. Be submissive to your husbands. Okay? Not stealing, but showing all good trustworthiness, so that they adorn the teaching of Elohim, our Savior, in every way. That's an amazing, amazing idea. It's a beautiful idea that when we walk in these things and we do these things and we've got these attitudes of mind and people see us, that we adorn the teaching of Yehovah. For the saving gift of Elohim has appeared to all men, instructing us to renounce wickedness and worldly lusts, and to live self-controlled, righteously and reverently in the present age. Okay, and all these references to self-control, they're talking about these things that we've looked at, to have control over your spirit, over who you are and how you present yourselves to other people. No matter what you're feeling inside, how you present yourselves outwardly to other people, it's to have self-control and to have a grip on your spirit. Looking for the blessed expectation and esteemed appearance of the great Elohim and our Savior Yeshua Messiah, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to cleanse for himself a people, his own possession, ardent for good works. If we think, well, he's cleansed for himself a people, but then we go out and we've got all this wickedness dwelling in our hearts, and, you know, it takes a certain level of provocation for us to let that wickedness out towards people, when we wouldn't allow those tests to let wickedness out in the things that we find easier to control, then that's no good. We're no longer cleansed for Yeshua. Speak these matters, urge and reprove with all authority, and let no one despise you. Okay, so that's what Paul tells Titus to do. That's his instructions on teaching an assembly. So this is what I'm going to do. Colossians 3:18 to 25 says, "Wives, subject yourselves to your own husbands as is proper in the master. Husbands, love your wives and do not be bitter toward them. Children, obey your parents in all, for this is well-pleasing to the master. Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged." And as I say, these things are true in any of these relationships. Okay, husbands, do not provoke your wives lest they become discouraged. Wives, do not provoke your husbands lest they become discouraged. In the marriage, what is incumbent upon the wife is to be submitted to the husband. What's incumbent on the husband is to be submitted to the wife in as much as he loves his wife. It takes both of those elements to the marriage for it to work. If one person looks at the other person and says, well, you're not doing this, that, and the other in the word, and the other person looks back at them and says, well, you're not doing this, that, and the other, and neither of them is willing to change and to move forward and to be any different, then the situation simply will not improve at all. The only thing that we have any control over in our lives is the ability to change ourselves. Okay, if we're in a relationship with somebody else, we cannot change that other person. But what the word tells us, what I'm going to show you, is that it says if you change yourself, then that will change the other person. Servants, obey your masters according to the flesh in all respects, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing Elohim. And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the master and not to men. Okay, what's the context of this statement? Oh, do all things as to Yehovah. Well, that's a good sentiment, and absolutely we can take that from this passage. But the context is, look, be submitted to one another. And whatever you do, do it heartily as to Yehovah, not as to men. Okay, if the only way that you can bring yourself to do these things, to be submitted to your husband, to love your wife and to not be bitter towards them, the only way you can bring yourself to do that is to focus on Yehovah, then do that. Knowing that from the master you shall receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the master Messiah that you serve. But he who does wrong shall be repaid for the wrong which he's done, and there is no partiality. Proverbs 19:13 says, "A foolish son is a calamity to his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dripping." Okay, you can see how these things in a marriage, in a relationship, cause the marriage or relationship to just be destroyed over a time. The contentions of a wife who's not submitted to her husband, it's a continual dripping, and this has an effect on the husband as well. But we're going to look at the husband's role in this too. Proverbs 25:24 says, "It is better to dwell in the corner of a roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman." That's the word of Elohim. Don't be contentious, because what you're doing is you're making your situation worse, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse because you're being stubborn and you won't swallow your pride and be different. Proverbs 31:11 to 12 says, "The heart of a husband shall trust her. He has no lack of gain." This is talking about the Proverbs 31 wife, the ideal wife. It says that the heart of a husband trusts her. Okay, this is not something that I'd ever experienced in any relationship that I'd ever been in before I got married. Okay, but to actually trust somebody, implicitly trust them. And it does go back to what I was saying about do all things as to the master. Okay, I know that Ashley follows the word. I know that she'll do all these things, if for nothing else, because they're in the word. The heart of a husband shall trust her. That's so important. You can look, does the heart of your wife trust you? Does the heart of your husband trust you? Actually trust you and know that you will act correctly. She shall do him good and not evil all the days of her life. You say that to a lot of women, they'd just laugh at you, they'd scoff, and they'd be like, yeah, all right, you'd be lucky. It's not the way that we're to be. Ephesians 6:11 says, "Put on the complete armor of Elohim," all of the word, everything. It's truth. You want all of it. Okay, you take away a bit of the truth, you've got less truth, that's no good. Not as bad as adding to the truth, because then you've got lies. But you want the complete armor of Elohim, for you to have power to stand against the schemes of the devil. I would guarantee you in your relationships that Hasatan will come with his schemes, and he will try to undo that relationship, and he'll try to get you to stray from out of the word of Elohim. Proverbs 31 verse 23. That's the role of the wife. This is the role of the husband, because within the ideal wife, it doesn't just say things about the wife. It says things about the husband as well. In order for the wife to be the ideal wife, the husband has to do his part. It says her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Her husband sits among the elders. What are the qualifications for an overseer or an elder? The reason I left you in Crete was that you should straighten out what was left undone and appoint elders in every city as I commanded you. If anyone is unreprovable, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of loose behavior or unruly. For an overseer has to be unreprovable for the reasons that we've looked at. As a steward of Elohim, not self-willed, not prone to anger, not given to wine, not contentious, not greedy for money, but kind to strangers, a lover of what is good, self-controlled again, righteous, set apart, and temperate, clinging to the faithful word according to the teaching, in order to be able to both encourage by sound teaching and to reprove those who oppose it. Remember, this is the characteristics of the husband of the ideal wife. He's got to be able to encourage by sound teaching as well as to reprove. When it comes to the relationship between a man and a wife, if you're just always reproving, but you don't have the ability to encourage by sound teaching, then that will not work. And the same is true for a wife. Proverbs 31:28 says, her children shall rise up and call her blessed. This is an aspect of the ideal wife. Her husband too, and he praises her. Okay, so part of the woman being the ideal wife is that her husband praises her. It's important. People, when they read Proverbs 31 and they look at their wife, they look at the characteristics and they go, well, she's not doing this and she's not doing that. I would submit that that's the wrong way to read Proverbs 31. Okay, you want to praise your wife. So what you need to do is look at the aspects in Proverbs 31 that your wife is doing, because she's being the ideal wife in those regards. Proverbs 31 verse 10 says, who does find a capable wife? For she is worth far more than rubies. Okay? Women are incredibly tough in the things that they do. In child rearing, the things that they endure. Okay? They are incredibly capable. They're incredibly tough in the things that they do. She also rises while it is still night and provides food for her household and a portion for her girls. Okay, you want something that you can praise your wife over. Here's an ideal thing that I would say that women excel at. She shall gird herself with strength and strengthen her arms. Again, these are things where women are incredibly tough. Okay, not all women are going to be like this. But the ideal wife, the characteristics that you're looking for are these things. So don't look at the things in Proverbs 31 which are not apparent in your wife. Okay, praise her in the things that are apparent in her. Proverbs 21 verse 19 says, it is better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and frustrated woman. Now that puts a bit of a different spin on it, doesn't it? Okay, the woman shouldn't be being contentious. The woman should be submitted to her husband. But she also shouldn't be frustrated. What's she frustrated over? The situation has two roles within it. And as I say, if both of them are bad, then it's going to be a really bad situation. If one of them's bad, the other person needs to focus on themselves and help and encourage, exhort when it's necessary. But look at these things. Look at what the criteria are, that her husband praises her, he's encouraging towards her. We're to be kind, we're to not be angry, we're to not be bad-tempered. All of these things are what are going to create a better situation, but we'll see that as we go on. What I would recommend to people, okay, if you're in a situation like that, address whatever it is, because in a situation like that, everyone's aware of what's going on. Okay? There is an elephant in the room in the situation, and if you keep ignoring it, then you can never address it. And if you've got an elephant living with you, it's going to be defecating all over the floor and eating all your food and smashing up all your furniture. But if you pretend like it doesn't exist, you're never going to be able to address it. You're never going to be able to do anything about it whatsoever. You have to talk about it. Colossians 3:12-14 says, "Therefore, as chosen ones of Elohim, set apart and beloved, put on compassion, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, patience, bearing with one another, forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, indeed, as Messiah forgave you, so also should you." Okay, this is great advice for in a situation where you're going to go and you're going to deal with an elephant that's in the room in a situation so that it can get better. But above all these, put on love, which is a bond of the perfection. And not doing these things is a greater sin than it is to not do the minutiae of the Torah. This is how we must be with one another, and this is how we must represent Yahovah to the world. 2 Timothy 2:24-26. "And a servant of the master should not quarrel, but be gentle towards all, able to teach, patient when wrong." These are great things to bear in mind in the context of a marriage. Don't quarrel. Be patient when the other person wrongs you. In meekness, instructing those who are in opposition. In meekness, instructing them. Lest somehow Elohim gives them repentance unto a thorough knowledge of the truth, and they come to their senses and out of the snare of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his desire. So for anybody who's ever written and said, what should I do in this situation? This is what you should do. Address the situation, but address it in meekness, lest Yahovah gives them repentance and they come to their senses. Proverbs 13:10 says, "Where there is strife, there is pride." That's a statement to bear in mind. Okay, when we've got these issues with anger, with bad temper, with not being kind, with not being patient towards people, it's because of pride. That's what causes these things. It's the root. Of course it is. Because if we were willing to swallow our pride, then when anger came up inside of us, we would immediately go to these things as the course of action. Luke 6:31-36 says, "And as you wish men should do to you, you also do to them in the same way. And if you love those loving you, what favor have you? For sinners too love those loving them. And if you do good to those doing good to you, what favor have you? For even sinners do the same." Okay, if you're in a situation like this, don't look at the other person and say, well, they're this, that, and the other, and, you know, if they were to change, I'd be able to change. No, you're to love them. If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive back, what favor have you? For even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. We're called to a higher standard. Rather, love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting none in return, and your reward shall be great. You shall be sons of the Most High, because he's kind to the thankless and wicked ones. And this is applicable in all levels of relationships. Okay, children with the parents. If your parents aren't acting in the way that you think is righteous, this is how you act towards them. This is the standard of behavior. You show them what is right by acting correctly towards them. Therefore, be merciful as your Father also is merciful. He is the one whose name we bear. 1 Peter 3:1-18 says, "In the same way, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that if any are disobedient to the word, they without a word might be won by the behavior of their wives." Bear in mind who this is written to. Okay, Peter was an apostle to the Jews. When he's writing to the Jews, they know what the word is. Okay? So saying anyone who's disobedient to the word, so this is applicable for Torah keeper with Torah keeper, where one is being disobedient to the word. Okay? Wives, be subject to your own husbands in this, so that if any are disobedient to the word, without a word they might be won by the behavior of their wives. Again, what you can do, the domain that you control is yourself, ruling over your own spirit and how you act towards them. So so that they might be won by your behavior, having seen your blameless behavior in fear, having seen your behavior. That's how all these things work, how they're all described. Your adornment should not be outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on garments, but the hidden man of the heart, with the incorruptible ornament of a meek and peaceable spirit, which is of great value before Elohim. There are very few things that you will be able to say are of great value before the creator of the universe, but you have within your power the ability to craft yourself into something of great value to him. For in this way, in former times, the set-apart women who trusted in Elohim also adorned themselves, being subject to their own husbands. As Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him master. This is, she was submitted to him. She called him my Lord, my master, of whom you became children, doing good and not frightened by any fear. In the same way, husbands live understandingly together, giving respect to the wife as the weaker vessel. Okay, not when something happens, when the other person provokes you and you feel like you're going to just explode or you're going to be bad-tempered towards them. No, live it understandingly with them, treating them as the weaker vessel and as being heirs together of the favor of life, so that your prayers are not hindered. Implication being that if you're not doing this, your prayers may well be hindered. To sum up, let all of you be like-minded, sympathetic, loving as brothers, tender-hearted, humble-minded. How many times do these things have to be said before we recognize them for the important matters that they are? Not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling. Again, when you see the other person doing bad, when you see them provoking you rather, don't return that to them. Have control over your own spirit. Walk in what is right. But on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this in order to inherit a blessing. For he who wishes to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. Because the eyes of Yehovah are on the righteous and his ears open to their prayers. But the face of Yehovah is against those who do evil. And as I say, these things are the weightier matters of the Torah. These are the most important things to Yehovah. So if we're not doing these, he closes his ear to our prayers. Now, he's kind, he's patient, he's compassionate as well. He walks us along this path. I don't think that this has come up at this time for no reason. I don't think it's a coincidence. And who is the one doing evil to you if you become imitators of the good? How are people going to do evil to you? Okay, even if they do something wrong, okay? If you don't respond in that way, you respond in a way that's good towards them with a soft word which turns away wrath, how are they going to do evil to you? Okay, it teaches them, it instructs them in your behavior, and they feel guilt for the wrong that they've done. If someone does wrong towards you, though, and you act in an angry way towards them, they don't feel any kind of guilt whatsoever. But even if you suffer for righteousness' sake, you're blessed. So even if that's not how it turns out, and you end up suffering for the sake of righteousness, for the sake of doing good, you're blessed. And do not fear their threats, neither be troubled. But set apart Yehovah Elohim in your hearts, and always be ready to give an answer to everyone asking you a reason concerning the expectation that is in you, with meekness and fear, having a good conscience, so that when they speak against you as doers of evil, they falsely accuse your good behavior in Messiah and shall be ashamed. For it is better, if it is the will of Elohim, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. If someone does evil to you, you do good back to them. And it's better that you do that and you do the good in the situation and you suffer for doing that even than it is that you do evil in the situation. Because even Messiah once suffered for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to Elohim. And this is what it's telling us will happen. Okay, if you act in this way towards people, then it will bring them to Elohim. They'll be able to see your behavior. It bears witness to them. Okay, and Messiah did the same for us. Ephesians 5:22-33. Wives, subject yourselves to your own husbands as to the master, because the husband is the head of the wife, as also the Messiah is the head of the assembly and he is savior of the body. These are just real fundamental things. It's not like, oh, I'm just not going to be submitted to my husband. These are absolute core things that wives must be submitted to their husband. It's said so many times throughout Scripture, and without it, as we've seen, the whole situation just deteriorates. It becomes a complete nonsense. And the idea of, oh, I'm a Torah keeper and walking in righteousness just becomes a joke to anyone who can see it. But as the assembly is subject to Messiah, so also let the wives be to their own husbands in every respect. Okay, if your husband does something that you don't like, you're subject to him because that's the right thing to do. And it's better that you suffer for doing what is good than suffer for doing wrong. Husbands, love your wives as Messiah also did love the assembly and gave himself for it, in order to set it apart and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, in order to present it to himself a splendid assembly, not having spot or wrinkle of any sort, but that it might be set apart and blameless. In this way, husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Okay, we're Yeshua's body, aren't we? Okay, and he loves us. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but feeds and cherishes it, as also the master does the assembly, because we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This secret is great, but I speak concerning the Messiah and the assembly. However, you too, everyone, let each one love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she fears her husband. It's just the two very basic components that cause the troubles in all the marital dysfunction that you see. It either comes from one or the other of these, or both. Exodus 34, 6-7. Yehovah passed before him and proclaimed his name, Yehovah, Yehovah, and all compassionate, showing grace or favor, patient, great in kindness and truth, watching over kindness for thousands, forgiving crookedness and transgression and sin, but by no means leaving unpunished. So as we're looking at all of this, as we're looking at the idea of we're to be kind towards people, and kindness outweighs, just the minutiae of the Torah, people may well, and I can already hear the things that people would say, is that this is exactly the problem. We've said this before, you speak the truth, but you don't speak it with love. And somebody who left here said something very similar to me. And I explained that, I basically said, where was the point that we were unloving? And they basically said, well, it was in the way that you are so blunt with what the word says. And I explained that the word is a rebuke to those who do not want to hear it, those who are disobedient to it. It's a rebuke to them. So if you're hearing it as a rebuke, it's because you're being disobedient to it. If it wasn't a rebuke to you, you wouldn't be taking offense. There's no lack of love there. But I need to address this. Jude 22, verse 23 says, and show compassion. It's the same word there as chesed. It's kindness. Show kindness towards some who are doubting, but others save with fear, snatching them out of the fire, hating even the garment defiled by the flesh. Because obviously as well, when we're looking at these things, we're looking at them in the context of relationships. Then what is the correct way to instruct? When is it correct to encourage? When is it correct to rebuke? Okay? Show compassion, kindness towards some, but others save with fear. Okay, when you approach somebody, the first way that you approach anybody is obviously with kindness, and you spend a great deal of time with them. When it gets to a point, though, when they've heard the truth, they accept what you're saying is true, but they won't do it. That's the time to tell them the consequences of their disobedience. Proverbs 25, verse 11 says, a word spoken at the right time is like apples of gold in settings of silver. You don't need to worry. We talked before about what the King James Version calls the doors of utterance. The Yehovah will open the doors of utterance to you. You don't need to worry about engineering a situation in which you can say things to a person. You pray about it and you ask Yehovah to reveal it because of this. Speaking the truth at the right time is so valuable. You can have something that you can think somebody really needs to hear, but if you wait until Yehovah gives you the opportunity to say it, often something will come up in their life and they'll bring the situation to you, and then you can speak the truth into the situation because you wait for the right time to say these things. A man brings joy by the answer of his mouth, and a timely word, how good it is. Proverbs 15:17-18 tells us, better is a meal of vegetables where love is than a fatted calf with hatred. Again, this gets back to the idea of, love without truth, for a short word, is better than truth without love. Okay, better is a meal of vegetables. You think about having the word of Elohim as the food that you eat. Better is a meal of vegetables where love is than a fatted calf with hatred. A man of wrath stirs up strife, but he who is patient appeases strife. It's amazing just how prevalent this is throughout the scriptures. It goes hand in hand all the way. Kindness and truth. That's who he is. He's great in kindness and truth. Look, you fast for strife and contention and to strike with the fist of wrongness. You do not fast as you do this day to make your voice heard on high. Okay, if you've got this strife, which as we've seen, comes from giving impetus to anger, which comes from pride. Okay, if you've got this going on in your life, and then you come and you do Yom Kippur, okay, Yehovah isn't going to hear that. He's not interested in religious works without the rest of it as well. He says that throughout his word. Matthew 5:23-24. If then you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother holds whatever against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go first, make peace with your brother and then come and offer your gift. It's about getting yourself, your mind, where you're at with other people correct before you start trying to be like, oh, I'm so righteous because I'm doing all of the minutiae of Torah. Again, the weightier matters of the Torah, yeah, tithing, great. Mishpatim, kindness, faith, these have to be done without neglecting the minutiae. It's a holistic walk. James 1:26 says, if anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is worthless. It's worthless. What Paul says, if I give out all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I give my body to be burned but do not have love, I'm not profited at all. Not I'm profited a bit. I'm not profited at all because I've missed it. Exodus 20:7, you do not carry the name of Yehovah your Elohim in vain. For Yehovah does not leave the one unpunished who carries his name in vain. We are charged with carrying his name before people. Proclaims his name, he's compassionate, he shows grace, he's patient, he's great in kindness and truth. Truth's actually mentioned last here. Okay? All of these things, if we take these and we take his name upon ourselves, and yet we do not present this to people, we are profaning his name among the Gentiles. We're as bad as people who sin and profane his name. Galatians 5:13-26, for you brothers have been called to freedom, only do not use freedom as an occasion for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the entire Torah is completed in one word, in this you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another. And I say, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not accomplish the lust of the flesh. And we think of walking in the Spirit as doing the minutiae of Torah. And it is. It does encompass that. But he goes on to explain what he's talking about by don't walk in the flesh. Walk in the Spirit. Have rule over your spirit. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are opposed to each other, so that you do not do what you desire to do. But if you're led by the Spirit, you are not under Torah. And the works of the flesh are well known, which are these: adultery, whoring, uncleanness, indecency, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, quarrels, jealousies, fits of rage, selfish ambitions, dissensions, factions, envy, murders, drunkenness, wild parties, and the like. The like of all these things. I've highlighted the ones which are relevant to what we've been talking about today. Of which I forewarn you, even as I also said before, that those who practice such as these shall not inherit the kingdom of Elohim. It's amazing. Okay? Those who sin and don't master those basic tests, they're not going to inherit the kingdom of Elohim. But if we don't pass the tests with these, we will not either. For the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, gentleness, self-control. Again, being in control of your spirit. Against such there is no Torah. And the word tells us that if you follow the word, then you'll have all of these. But it's not just following the 5 books of Moses. Or it's not just following the minutiae of them anyway. And those who are of Messiah have crucified the flesh with its passions and its desires. These are the passions and desires of the flesh that it's talking about in context. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. James 1, 19 to 25, and we're going to come to an end after a few scriptures here. So then, my beloved brothers, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to bad temper. For the bad temper of man does not work the righteousness of Elohim. Again, the test comes up. You're going to keep your temper. You're going to be in control of your spirit. You're going to lose your temper and say, oh, I shouldn't really be doing that, but I'm going to change myself over the course of my life, and eventually I'll get to the point where I want to be. Those are lies. We know that they're lies. This is particularly relevant for me. I think about these things. I think about the times in the past when I failed at these things, before I even recognized that they were as important as they are. There was a time, not all that long ago, when I was talking to somebody. They contacted me. They asked if they could speak on Skype. And I'd spent the day, I can't remember what the issue was, but I was talking with somebody online about something. And I'd been talking to them for hours, and I was so frustrated with them. And then I get on the phone with this person. I spoke to them for like 3 or 4 hours. About 3 hours into it, we were talking about something that I did not recognize as truth at all. And I thought that it just sounded completely wrong. And I've been trying to instruct that it was wrong. I ended up just completely losing my temper with them, completely losing my patience, and just making a complete show of myself. And it is that little bit of folly completely outweighs wisdom. Any good that's been done, that's just that little bit of folly completely outweighs it. These things are so dangerous, so dangerous. The bad temper of man does not work the righteousness of Elohim. It is true. Therefore, put away all filthiness and overflow of evil, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your lives. Become doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. All these things that we've read today, that we've read probably so many times when we've read through the scriptures. And yet we think when people read the Torah and then they don't do the Torah, they don't keep the Sabbath, or they don't wear tzitzit or whatever, we think that this is who this is talking about, but it's not. It's talking about us. We read the word and we're hearers of the word, and we're not doers of the word. Because if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. He looks at himself and goes away and immediately forgets what he was like. We look at the word, we look at these things that are required of us, and we just think, we give the same stupid excuses. Oh, I'm on a journey. I'll change it eventually. I know that I'm not supposed to be doing that, but I'll stop it at some point, or, whatever. I'll try a little bit, and I've changed so much. It's just garbage. But he that looked into the perfect Torah, that of freedom, and continues in it, not becoming a hearer that forgets, but a doer of the work, this one shall be blessed in his doing. Proverbs 18, 20 to 21, a man's stomach is satisfied from the fruit of his mouth. He is satisfied with the increase of his lips. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those loving it eat of its fruit. If you walk in those lusts of the flesh, even the ones that you think, oh, I'll control them eventually, or I'll get better at it, you will eat the fruit of that. You will not inherit the kingdom of Elohim if you walk in those ways. Acts 8, 21 to 23, some great advice. You have neither part nor lot in this matter, for your heart is not right before Elohim. Repent therefore of this evil of yours and plead with Elohim to forgive you the intention of your heart, like we were talking about, that we are to plead before him and not just presume upon his grace in these matters when we are like this with people. Plead these things to him for him to forgive us the intention of our hearts. For I see that you are poisoned by bitterness and bound by unrighteousness. If we've not let these things go, and we've not transcended beyond them, and we've not recognized them as tests from Hasatan that we now pass, we are bound by unrighteousness in these things. Philippians 2, 1-5. If then there is any encouragement in Messiah, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of spirit, if any affection and compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same mind, having the same love, one in soul and of purpose, doing none at all through selfishness or self-conceit, but in humility considering others better than yourselves. Each one should look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. For let this mind be in you, which was also in Messiah Yeshua. I'll finish on the next slide. I just wanted to share this with you because this is what this reminded me of. I want to show you a verse out of the Septuagint when it's Yaakov blessing his sons or speaking prophecy over his sons. Okay, let this mind be in you, which was also in Messiah Yeshua. And just reminded me of this verse, which is not in the Masoretic text. It says, his eyes shall be more cheering than wine. This is talking about Yehudah. This is a messianic prophecy. I think about what Charlie was talking about last week about how Yeshua was when he was here. Yeah, I don't think that it's any mistake that this has been taken out of the Masoretic text, being so obvious a messianic prophecy. His eyes shall be more cheering than wine. I'll leave you with that pleasant thought, and we'll come back in a little bit.